Your brain never turns off. It's like a light switch, but it doesn't turn on and off. It actually turns side to side. So if you think of it as a light switch sideways, it flips from executive mode to creative mode when you do these types of activities. And as it's in this more creative, deep problem-solving mode, it's just solving the problem in a totally different way. So you're basically accessing your deepest recesses of creativity and sort of flexible problem solving when you're doing that. So on the surface of it, when I'm laying on the grass, if I were a manager of me, I would look at that person on the grass and be like, wow, they're not at their desk working, right? And we punish these things, right?
Yeah.
But it's very clear. Every peak performer in the world just does this. I mean, the stories are endless. Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, built his day this way, right? He works for 90-minute blocks and then 90 minutes to 2 hours, and then he takes a break for 30 minutes.
Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Hey, talent growers. Welcome back to another episode of the TalentGrow Show. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow. And this week, we're going to talk about how to help yourself get better results from your brain, especially when you think about when we need to be creative, innovative to solve problems. A lot of times we try to do it in a way that doesn't allow our brain to thrive. And this week, our guest is James Garrett, who is a brain science curator, and he's going to talk to us about some of the research out there in neuroscience and brain science and how we can harness that to get better performance from our brain and better results at work. He's going to talk to us about how to switch between the executive mode and the creative mode of our brain, ways that we can leverage taking breaks and even potentially taking naps so that we can actually become more productive. So I hope that you enjoy a lot of actionable advice and tips in this episode and an interesting story about the Queen of Jordan. So without further ado, here we go. James Garrett on the TalentGrow Show. Talent growers, this week I have James Garrett. He's a brain science curator, neuroscience entrepreneur, and founder of Brain by Design. He passionately believes anyone can become who they imagine themselves to be at their very best. I love that. James spent his 20s doing psychology research at Columbia, Tufts, and Yale, and his 30s building Think Unlimited, a nonprofit organization that created brain-based curricula in partnership with the Queen of Jordan. I don't think a lot of people can say that. Through his platform, it's very cool. Through his platform, Brain by Design, he now builds e-learning courses about how to maximize your brain's potential, a rare combination of scientist, trainer, and entrepreneur. His previous work in the Middle East was featured by New York Times, Fast Company, and TEDx. And I had the pleasure of meeting James when we were both speakers at a conference recently. And I enjoyed our in-between conversations. He was in the audience for my presentation. I was in the audience for his presentation. And I feel like we're kindred spirits in that we geek out on the same kind of stuff. And, right? We're like reading the same authors. We talk about very similar theories. I love what he's talking about, and I like his style. So, James, I'm so glad that you've agreed to come on the TalentGrow Show to share some of that with our listeners.
Thank you, Halelly. So glad to be here.
I'm really glad that you're here as well. And before we get started, I always ask my guests to give us just a brief overview of their professional journey, although your bio does a pretty good job of that. But tell us, where did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
I didn't come from a home that had a lot of books, actually, growing up, interestingly. And frankly, growing up, I thought all that reading was fiction. I didn't really know the genre of nonfiction even existed. So you can kind of see the starting place, but a very suburban, vanilla upbringing. I had a grandmother who was sort of a self-taught intellectual. She didn't go to college, but she was this kind of voracious reader. So I had to have some influences in my life that kind of helped me down this road, but I was hungry for more and did find nonfiction, fell in love with reading, fell in love with psychology when I was in university, and dove into research and thought I was going to become a scientist. Did tons and tons of research, more than I probably should have. I'm sure my social life suffered because of it. Sort of at the end of that journey of thinking I was going to become a scientist, what I kind of realized was that science is incredibly powerful, but the way we've designed academic knowledge that grows up is that it's really designed for other academics. That's really designed for other scientists to digest.
Yeah.
And that sort of bugged me, that there wasn't a way for the science to actually make a difference in people's lives. So this is slowly changing, with movements like the positive psychology movement and others. But it was something that I kind of realized was a need to be this sort of bridge between academia and the rest of the world, the rest of our lives. And so being sort of an idealist at heart, I suppose I've set about the last 10 or 15 years trying to actually take the science out of the labs and get it into people's lives. So that's taken a number of different forms. The first big one was Think Unlimited that you mentioned, and now Brain by Design.
I'm so curious to hear about how you ended up connecting with the Queen of Jordan. Like, that's just a little bit unusual.
It is unusual, right? Well, the short story is both my wife and I joined Peace Corps that sent us to Jordan. So that's how we got there in the first place. So we started working on a very grassroots level in schools and youth centers there. Spent a lot of time just, literally living in a little city called Salt, and just got to understand and know the culture and some of the challenges in the education system, that sort of thing. We were there in the middle of the Arab Spring in 2011.
Wow.
And at that point, we'd actually spent most of our Peace Corps service building out a program that was designed to kind of bring learning to life for kids. And again, sort of rote memorization is really what kids get in Jordan in public school systems. And not to say we don't get that here as well. We certainly do. It's really a problem all over the world, that our education systems were built for a different era around the Industrial Revolution. But that early start to the way we set up education systems, 100 plus years ago, those starts have massive influence over time. The way we begin something has undue influence over time. And so the systems get very rigid. So anyway, so we saw these kids who were, bright, motivated, optimistic, but very much a part of a system that didn't bring education and their sort of creative capacities didn't allow those to flourish. It really dampened them. And sort of around the world, US and everywhere else, the skills of the 21st century are around things like cognitive flexibility and divergent thinking and creativity and conceptual thinking, right? It's no longer about memorizing. Memorizing, it's not really what we're trying to train kids to do around the world if we're trying to raise innovators and creators and entrepreneurs. So we built a program that sort of took on a life of its own. We fully expected to come back after 2 years, but while we were Peace Corps volunteers, we fortuitously met the Queen of Jordan. Actually, what happened was she showed up at one of our camps. We were co-putting on this sort of camp, and literally the day, so these things are kind of secretive until they actually happen, but we didn't know she would be there. In fact, funny enough, we didn't even shower that morning, my wife or I. And so here we are, sort of like, just coming to put on our camp. And, I'm uncapped, didn't shave that day, et cetera. And there's all this security around the school that we're doing, or the center that we're doing it at. And there's all this buzz, right? And so eventually, we realize, something's going on and the Queen is coming. Oh, great. Okay. So of course we don't know when, but we're just doing our thing. And she literally just walked into our room. And so she sat there and observed what we were doing. And we had a lovely 5-10 minute conversation with her. She really was intrigued by the program we'd built, and then turned to one of the executive directors of one of her organizations that she sponsors and says, I want you to partner with James and Halelly. So anyway, that's what happened essentially. And then we met her a few other times.
Wow, cool. Sounds like serendipity.
Yeah, it kind of was,
Yeah.
It kind of was.
Well, serendipity led you to the opportunity, and then your competence landed you the opportunity. I'm sure of that. So very nice. Now, you talked about skills of the 21st century and needing to be more divergent and creative. And that was one of the main topics you discussed in the presentation that I saw you give. And I liked how you described that the mind has two modes, and that a lot of times we are asking people to be more creative, or that we ask ourselves, we expect ourselves or we need to be more creative, but we're going about it in the wrong way. And you say that there's just sort of two modes. And so we need to actually move ourselves into the creative mode and out of the other mode, which is the executive mode. So I'd love for you to talk more about that.
Yeah, so this is cutting edge neuroscience. This is one of the most kind of fascinating and talked about findings right now, which is that our brain goes into what psychologists call mind wandering mode when you don't require it to do anything at all. So when you're getting ready in the morning, taking a shower, when you're doing the dishes or sort of routine tasks, they don't require that much concentration. Driving, going for a walk in the park. Your brain does a number of different functions in this mode. But basically the big distinction is your brain only has two modes of attention. One is executive mode and one is this mind wandering mode. I like to call it creative mode. Scott Barry Kaufman, a very well-known psychologist at UPenn, calls it imagination mode. So what we didn't realize is how productive and how powerful this state of mind actually is. We used to think of it as daydreaming.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
And you'll notice it, I have a 5-year-old, and so I'll notice it. Even this morning, I noticed it as she was eating breakfast. She just kind of went into her mind, right? We would say she spaced out, right? Mm-hmm. We have these very derogatory terms for it, actually.
Yeah.
But I knew exactly what was happening, which is that her mind is basically going into reflection, focusing inward and going into mind wandering mode. We're not spacing out, we're tuning in. So it's not only not an unproductive mode, it's a highly productive mode, because what your brain is really trying to do is deep problem solve in a totally different way than the way we usually problem solve in executive mode. So executive mode, on the other hand, is whenever you're directing your attention at something, you're focusing on writing an email, whenever you're paying attention, you're paying attention to someone talking or you're reading something or whatever that is. That mode, it costs you something. It's energy. It drains our kind of mental energy. That even those words, pay attention, are an apt phrase because it's a cognitively expensive activity. But we also think linearly and logically in that mode. Nothing wrong with that. It's just one tool in our kind of cognitive toolbox. Whereas we have this very different way of solving problems, which is creative mode, where the brain is much more flexible, much more playful in the way that it goes about solving problems. So think of it this way. Your brain is like a Google data center of experiences, education, books you've read, podcasts you've listened to, conversations you've had, relationships in your life, a rich web of a life literally knit into your brain through your brain's incredible capacity to record or create memories of these things. So as your brain does this, you've got this rich resource of potential solutions to the problems you face. And what we don't realize is your brain already loves solving problems. Your brain is basically a dot connector. It likes to put things together and solve things. It loves it, right? It's a meaning maker. So if you allow your brain to do what it does naturally, namely solve these problems in very creative ways, if you give it space to do that, it simply will do that. The misunderstanding of mind wandering mode or creative mode is simply that a lot of it happens on an unconscious level and it feels very random. So we can, sleep all night, wake up in the morning, and we have this brilliant insight. And we think that all that happened was that we had a good idea. What we don't realize happened for hours and maybe even days or weeks before that insight is your mind literally has been wandering around that Google data center of ideas, experiences, an article you read in Inc. magazine, or 1,000 different data points that it can kind of use to solve the problem. And literally pulling those things off the shelf, looking at them, examining them, reflecting, will this help me solve the problem? And if it does, then it shoots that idea up into the conscious realm, right? And we experience it as insight. If it doesn't, it basically puts it back on the shelf and keeps looking. So again, a lot of psychologists call this deep problem solving as opposed to kind of what we usually do, which is try to solve it by staring at our computer, thinking of this as a sort of, it's the way we think of it logically. It's not logical. In fact, interestingly, your brain in this mode is sort of biased toward unusual connections, even bizarre connections. And it's not that all those connections are brilliant. A lot of them are not. but every once in a while they are. And again, this is the sort of wellspring of creativity and innovation.
Yeah. So from a practical perspective, I guess if we can concretize an action item or to-dos from this, what really do we want to do here? So do we just need to spend more time allowing for creativity or for creative mode? Do we need to specifically prescribe a time for that during a process? Like what do you think we need to learn from this?
Well, there's sort of two dominant patterns, I think, in modern life. One is time pressure, right? We feel this intense, never-ending need to be productive with every single minute of our lives.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the sort of feeling. We all feel it. It's just simply that what we mean by that is every minute of our life should be in executive mode. That's sort of what that equates to. And what that leads to, the second thing is really that it activates a stress response in the body. So whenever you're on, whenever you're available, you're just running a low-level activated sort of sympathetic response in the body, which is basically stress. And so whenever that happens, you simply can't get into mind-wandering mode. The precondition for mind-wandering mode is relaxation.
Mm.
You've got to be relaxed. You've got to feel at ease. You know, if you're going for a walk, we'll get into activities in just a second of what you can actually do to kickstart what mind-wandering mode. But if you're going for a walk, you've got to be able to leave the phone at the office. Having the phone on you sort of closes that window. It doesn't allow your body and mind to relax enough to basically kickstart that mind-wandering process. So what do you do practically? Well, there's lots of different activities that you can do to get into mind-wandering mode. But the basic idea here is that you want to work in sprints and breaks. Sprint, break, sprint, break, sprint, break, as opposed to designing your workday like a marathon, which is what most of us do. So an 8 to 12-hour day is a marathon for your brain. Your brain can really only concentrate for about 90 minutes at a time. Mm-hmm. So what you want to do is, instead of going, and by 3 p.m. you feel exhausted and depleted and you find yourself surfing YouTube or Facebook, what you want to do is actually go hard and be really focused and try to get into peak states of concentration while you're working for those 90 minutes to, max maybe 2 hours. But then you want to get up from the computer and go for a walk. You want to basically distance yourself from the work you were just doing. I often will go for a walk and I'll lay down in the grass outside of my office, just simply to be with my own thoughts and let my mind reflect on what I've just done. And what I'm actually doing is, again, flipping. Again, the metaphor here is that your brain never turns off. It's like a light switch, but it doesn't turn on and off. It actually turns side to side. So if you think of it as a light switch sideways, it flips from executive mode to creative mode when you do these types of activities. And as it's in this more creative, deep problem-solving mode, it's just solving the problem in a totally different way. So you're basically accessing your deepest recesses of creativity and sort of flexible problem-solving when you're doing that. So on the surface of it, when I'm laying on the grass, if I were a manager of me, I would look at that person on the grass and be like, wow, they're not at their desk working, right? And we punish these things, right?
Yeah.
But it's very clear. Every peak performer in the world just does this. I mean, the stories are endless. Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, builds his day this way, right? He works for 90-minute blocks and then 90 minutes to 2 hours, and then he takes a break for 30 minutes, reflects on the previous meeting, goes for a walk, takes a nap, whatever it is. But he calls it his most important productivity tool. Another way of saying that is, what looks like a waste of time is actually deeply productive, not just in the sense that it helps you solve problems, but it also recharges that mental battery that you need to go back at it when you go back into executive mode, into concentration mode.
Love it. If you have a tendency to be stressed, like you have a very high stress job, there's lots of things weighing on your mind. I certainly know that sometimes when I physically disconnect from my desk or whatever, my computer, my mind is ruminating and kind of going over and over the stressors and the worries and the to-dos and so on. Now, is that good problem solving, mind wandering because I'm somewhere else, going for a walk and ruminating? Or is there something I need to do to try to accelerate breaking away from that kind of thinking?
Yeah, there is a little bit of a distinction between And this is a very fine distinction between rumination and mind wandering. I think there's more research that needs to be done on this. So it can be unproductive if your mind is basically overactive. And again, this is about how relaxed or kind of wound up you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, would it help to do a 5-minute meditation or even a breathing exercise to activate that calming system in your body? For sure. And then go for the walk? For sure. Anything you can do that will actually, or even doing a couple yoga poses, if you've got an office door and you can shut it, and I'll do this all the time. I'll move your body in any way that just kind of creates a state shift that kind of breaks the mental agitation, and again, moving your body is one of the best ways. Yoga, even just walking or running in place, anything that just shifts the physiology, the neurochemical stew that you're swimming in, can be enough to break that tendency of rumination. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay. That's sort of a higher level kind of application of this skill.
Yeah, I'm worried about worrying, right? This weekend. So Halelly. Okay.
For now, I think the real key is to step away from the desk. I mean, that's the hard thing is to give yourself permission to take that 5-minute break. And that's usually what I recommend is you'll get more comfortable with it over time and take longer breaks over time, but start with 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Every hour on the top of the hour, just step away from the computer and go for a walk outside. That's the easiest way to just start getting in the habit of accessing that deeper, more powerful, not necessarily more powerful, but that completely often unused part of our brain.
There you go. To maximize your utility value from your brain, right? Like to actually get all the juicy bits from it.
That's exactly what it is. That's right.
Very cool. Oh, James, we could talk about this for hours and hours. I have created an artificial constraint of a 30-minute podcast, which I lament often. So we're going to start wrapping up here. I want to have you share with us something. I know that sometimes it's hard to motivate ourselves to do something that's very hard to do. And as leaders, we sometimes also have to think about how to motivate others. Any great advice or tips or hacks that you can share about that?
Yeah, the biggest one is to shrink the size of whatever you're doing. So if you're overwhelmed by an inbox that has 100 plus emails in it, great. Set your timer on your phone for 10 minutes and clear out as many as you can do in 10 minutes and then sign out of your email and go on to something else. Then it becomes more like a game, right? It's kind of, you're actually in this sort of, it's like a challenge, right? You've got 10 minutes, like how much can I get done? As opposed to that ick feeling we feel that we avoid and we procrastinate. So I would shrink it. The other thing I would say is, BJ Fogg, professor at Stanford, has this beautiful idea of what he calls motivation waves. Whenever you are in a particularly productive state, ride that wave. So get as much done as you can in that state. Brilliant book called The Powerful Engagement. Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz talk about this as managing energy instead of time.
Yeah.
And in sort of a broad sense, that's this whole conversation has been about that. You're learning to listen to your body more than you are things outside of your body. And then harness that motivation when you have it. Another way of saying this is follow your flow, and I have that actually in my office sitting there. Follow your flow because that's where the creative juice and energy comes from. And if you're fighting against it, it can be tricky.
Yeah. And of course, I often put on my devil's advocate hat and it's popping up here for me. A lot of people are saying, well, then I have to go to a meeting that I'm scheduled for and I can't exactly do what I want to do or what makes sense for me energetically. So that can be, I know, a big challenge in today's world of work where you're not always the king or queen of your own time. But there are still plenty of times when you can.
Well, I would say your best energy is going to usually be for almost all of us in the morning. So, I'm in the habit of not checking my email first thing. I do all the hardest things in the morning, all the generative work that's not. So I don't check my email or social media in the mornings. I do that in the afternoons when I've got less charge in my mental battery. In the morning, that's when I can do the hard stuff. That's when I really got that good juice. So if I also, same thing with meetings, if I'm going to do meetings, you can design it so that it's sort of the activities that you want your best energy for, you want to do in the mornings. And the ones that are a little bit more, you've got to get done, like clearing out an inbox, you may want to do in the afternoon.
Yeah. Listeners, you might remember when I had Daniel Pink on, his latest book is When, and I know James, you're a fan of that too. So he talked about this as well. I think that was episode 83, if my memory serves me correctly. So go check that out to get even more about that. Very cool. Well, before you share one specific actionable tip, James, with our listeners, what's new and exciting on your horizon? What project or discovery has your attention these days?
I would say the entire field of brain tech or neurotech, depending different words for it. So I'll be going to a conference in beginning of November called the TransTech, so Transformational Technology Conference in Palo Alto. And it's an emerging field. I think it's a blue ocean. It's something that doesn't really exist as far as mass adoption. There are early companies that started, of course, with apps like Headspace and Happify, and earlier than that, it was Lumosity. But it's moving into wearables.
Oh, like Muse, like that one that measures how well you're
Muse is a great example that helps you meditate by giving you neurofeedback through reading your EEG, your brain waves. Halo Neuroscience is doing sort of transcranial magnetic stimulation to basically increase how fast you learn. Vital Neuro, who's a startup that I've been involved with a little bit. They've designed tech to neutralize stress in the workplace, but it's a headset, right? That again it's the best tech we have out there for reading your brain right now is EEG. And basically that reads brain waves or electrical activity from the brain. But anyway, there's a whole host of different things, but I really think this is a game changer. It's going to take human potential really to a whole new level, because take creativity, right? We actually know how creativity works. And when you dampen, areas of the brain that are kind of overly active and kind of bully the creative parts of our brain is one way to think of it. Yeah. If you can quiet those parts of the brain, which things like meditation do, for example, then the creativity naturally emerges. So if tech can sort of nudge our better selves in those directions, then that's exciting. So
very cool. Oh, you made me think of a person I need to connect you with, who's got a company that's designing a wearable called Apollo. Have you heard of that? It's very working with people. His name is Dave Rabin, and based in Pittsburgh. And the main audience they're working with right now for this wearable is people with PTSD. And it's like a watch, and it sends different energy waves, like different vibrations that actually can create more calm or can help you reduce anxiety and shift states. So cool.
I think I have seen this. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right. It uses the principles of entrainment, probably, which syncs up your body's internal kind of rhythms, your heart rhythm and your brainwave rhythms, to then pull those into a calmer state. A lot of the brain tech, a lot of what we're trying to do in general is about calming our brains and bodies down. The big picture is getting us out of a stress state, a high beta state, and into kind of an alpha state, which is calmer and where our brains are more focused. They have better ability to focus, better ability to be creative, and we just operate better in those.
Yes. I don't think we were designed for this chronic stress mode that we have in our modern world.
We really weren't.
No. Well, awesome. And so thank you for that. And that sounds exciting. I would like to hear about it afterwards, and maybe your biggest takeaways or insights there. What's an actionable tip that you have, something that listeners can do today, tomorrow, this week, to ratchet up their own productivity or creativity or leadership, whatever tack you want to take on it?
Well, I already mentioned my primary tip, which is 5-minute breaks, maybe at the top of the hour or whenever works. But the other one I would say, this comes straight from Dan Pink's book, When, is the 20-minute nap in the afternoon. So you want to take a 20-minute nap. You don't want to do it after 3 p.m. You won't sleep as well at night, or you'll have a harder time getting to sleep. But anytime before 3 p.m. and probably after 1, go for the 20-minute nap. Find a way. And again, this is hard in modern workplaces, but again, the most innovative companies like Google, Uber, Nike, Ben & Jerry's, Zappos, Facebook, Huffington Post, they've all got nap pods now. It's because the science is so clear. Like if you take a 20-minute nap in the afternoon, 27 to be accurate, because it takes 7 minutes to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. then you're just more productive. You're more productive, you're happier, more engaged, you have more emotional control, and that 20-minute nap boosted your creativity. So the outcomes for that very small investment are just enormous. And instead of sort of slogging through our afternoons and masking our exhaustion with caffeine and sugar, which is what most of us do, you'll actually get the same energized benefit, right, as caffeine and sugar, but you'll get all these other benefits as well, and you'll vastly increase your productivity and creativity in the afternoons.
Which is definitely something that has major ROI for all of us. So thank you for that tip. How can people learn more from you and about you and stay in touch, James?
So my website is brainbydesign.com. I've also got a Facebook page. You can like the Facebook page. It's just facebook.com/brainbydesign. If you're interested in, I do the e-learning courses. If you're interested, I've got those. You can check those out. You can actually preview those, the first session of those online. But if you're interested in sort of a summary, like a PDF, a free PDF of kind of the nuts and bolts of what we've talked about today, you can text the word brain to the number 44144. So text the word brain to 44144, and that will spit out a PDF to your inbox.
Awesome. Good. I love that you did that. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your insights with the Talent Growers today. And I love talking to you and love to stay in touch and hear more from you in the future.
Likewise, Halelly. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. Well, I love his energy and I love his insights. And so I hope that you enjoyed this episode, Talent Growers. I'd love to hear, what's your biggest takeaway? What did you try and how did it go? Or what's a question you have? Or what's a but? You want to put on that devil's advocate hat. What's still bugging you or what seems like a confounding element about this? Let's get a conversation going. I'm always super interested in hearing from you. And you can email me, or you can put it in the comments on the show notes page over on my website, talentgrow.com, on social media, or wherever you'd like to reach me. Even using that little voicemail tab on talentgrow.com, you can record me a short voicemail. Aside from that, I hope that you got lots of value and that you'll put it to good use, because action is the only way that any change happens. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at Talent Grow. And until the next time, make today great.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Grow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.